My husband is a world-renowned scientist. When asked about his personal life during an interview, he said, "I don't consider myself a suitable partner. In any case, I would never prioritize love and relationships. I'm only willing to dedicate my limited time to the pursuit of endless scientific discoveries." After the program aired, there was nothing but praise for his fearless dedication to science. I quietly put away my medical report. I have cancer, terminal stage. Those days when he went abroad to receive his award will be my last days in this world. Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. In the final moment before consciousness slipped away, the last thing I saw was the blinding light of the operating theater lamp. As my spirit left my body, I could suddenly see the entire surgical room. Then, I noticed the heart monitor beside the bed. The line representing my heartbeat had gone flat. At that moment, it dawned on me. I think I might be dead. I don't know why, but I've become a spirit able to float around everywhere. Just this morning, I was fine, able to exchange a few words with Lance. He had a presentation abroad, with a flight at noon today. So I woke up at 7 in the morning to make him breakfast. Lance, who seems so indifferent, is actually quite picky about his food. The toast has to be toasted just a tad darker. And the milk needs to be heated to precisely the right temperature. As our son would say, "Mom, you've spoiled Dad's palate." I neither agree nor disagree with this. After all, I've been taking care of him meticulously for 20 or 30 years. Even the most troublesome tasks have become habits. "Lance, I heard that the temperature abroad is going to drop suddenly due to some air mass," I said. "I've packed an extra down vest for you. The chewing gum is in the left pocket of your backpack. It might help with your ear popping on the plane. Don't stay up too late at night. Has your heart been bothering you recently? Get to bed early. It's the polar continental air mass." My words were abruptly interrupted. I looked up dully and met his clear eyes. The saying "time never defeats beauty" suits Lance Shaw quite well. His brow is still strong, and although he's approaching middle age, time seems to have left no trace on him. So the coldness he's carried since his youth can still pierce straight to my heart. He was correcting the inaccuracy in my first sentence. Due to some air mass should be polar continental air mass. But I just wanted to show my concern for him. I lowered my eyes. I straightened his tie. "All right, I got it. Take care on your trip, Lance." He walked past me, thinking I had nothing important to do this afternoon. But that wasn't true. He was going across the Atlantic to attend an academic conference to present his research findings. I also had a meeting to attend. It was my pre-surgery consultation. The doctor said the success rate of the surgery was only 20%. When the doctor informed me that my stomach cancer wasn't detected early enough, and the cancer cells had already spread throughout my body, I sat in the hospital corridor for an entire afternoon. The television hanging in the corner was broadcasting Newsnight, featuring the interview with Lance from a few days ago. The man with the cold eyes didn't want to waste time on anything other than his scientific research. Even when asked about his wife, he only briefly touched upon the subject. "I'm a bit of a blockhead," he said. "I don't understand love. My wife, she's more of a responsibility to me. Celebrate anniversaries? That's just formality. I'd rather conduct a few more experiments than spend time preparing for that." It sounded just like something Lance would say. Forget anniversaries, he didn't even celebrate birthdays. When I was younger, I used to pester him about it, hoping that one day he'd show up with a bouquet of beautiful roses. But I never received a single rose. That brain of his, capable of remembering countless data points, simply refused to remember those 4 digits of my birthday. Eventually, I started sitting alone at the table, preparing a bowl of longevity noodles for myself, and that was that. Lance was like an iron tree, incapable of blooming. It took me over 20 years to finally accept this truth. So in recent years, I began to slowly realize that I was the one who needed to change. Call it exhaustion or giving up, it doesn't matter. The funny thing is, he is who he is, and I am who I am. This truth, which he had laid out plainly before me decades ago, I only now understand. I crumpled up the medical report, stuffed it in my pocket, and only called our son. Josh is close to me. Because Lance doesn't like children. And his only son has no aptitude for scientific research. After hearing my emotionless narrative, Josh's voice became a bit choked up. Mom. You and Dad. I haven't told him, I said. I lowered my eyes, staring at the granite beneath my feet. I don't want to tell him. He is who he is, and I am who I am. Besides, what would he do if he knew I was ill? Would he put aside his obsessive scientific work to take care of me? Josh. I don't know how much longer I have left. If one day I die, don't tell your father either. I smoothed out the corner of my blouse. Why bring up things Lance Shaw doesn't care about, just to upset him? All right, Josh agreed on the other end of the phone. Mom, to be honest, Dad doesn't deserve it anyway. He really doesn't deserve someone as good as you. My spirit drifted along the hospital corridor. I saw the doctor come out of the operating room, shaking his head regretfully. Josh was crying by my hospital bed. He had brought me to the hospital since noon, and had been waiting outside the operating room until evening. But I wasn't strong enough to open my eyes. He was crying so heartbrokenly. I was anxiously pacing around him, but he couldn't see me. I wanted so badly to hug him and comfort him like I did when he was little, telling him not to cry. Josh had tried so hard, although he hadn't become a scientist as his father had hoped. His paintings were loved by many, and he had an exhibition coming up in Italy later this year. I sat beside him, looking up at the evening stars, singing to him as I used to when he was young. He couldn't hear me, but I felt that somehow, he would know his mom was by his side. Suddenly, I was carried away by a gust of wind to a place far, far away. The senses of a spirit after death are truly remarkable. On one hand, I could perceive what was happening in the hospital after my death. On the other, I found myself at the conference venue where Lance was attending a meeting. His meeting was supposed to last for 7 days. The man in the suit easily became the focus of the entire room. Young, handsome, with a resume that could be described as unparalleled. In fact, Lance had probably been the center of attention from a young age. During university, girls who fancied him were as common as fish in a river. In those days, when traditional thinking still lingered, some girls would boldly pursue him to his dormitory. Each time, he would look at them with that distant gaze of his. Wearing the most ordinary white shirt, arms clutching his textbooks. He would look down at them with restraint and detachment. I'm sorry, but I don't like you, he would say, his words particularly unforgiving. The popularity that many men prided themselves on was nothing but a nuisance to him. At that time, he had already won so many national awards that he could barely hold them all. His name was often on the lips of professors. I was one of the students who looked up to him, one of the most peripheral ones. I only dared to catch a glimpse of the corner of his shirt when leaving the cafeteria. Lance certainly didn't know that before our arranged meeting. I had already been secretly in love with him for 3 or 4 years. And I definitely wouldn't have known that 3 years after graduation, the arranged date my family set up for me would be with him. I won't have anyone I like, were the first words Lance said to me when we met. If I have to say I like something, I like doing experiments, arithmetic, anything but people, he said, frowning slightly. Even so, it couldn't hide his dazzling good looks. He articulated himself concisely and clearly. We're not talking about love, he said. We're just ensuring there's an heir, do you understand? Actually, at that time, Lance had made himself very clear. It was me who thought I could accept it, it was me who wanted to be with him. I always thought there would be time. Always thought that one day his clear, honest gaze would focus on me. I always thought that he would fall in love with me. Should I say it was presumptuous? To pin my hopes on the so-called familiarity breeding affection? Dedicating myself day and night. My spirit floated to his side. I watched him talking seriously with the scholar opposite him. The man was tall and slender, aloof yet elegant. Was I quite foolish? I wondered, hands in my pockets as I looked at him. They say that for people with high IQs. Looking at ordinary people is like ordinary people looking at fools. On the other side, my body was being loaded into the funeral home's car. The academic symposium was bustling with noise. Lance, did you think I was quite foolish? Lance sent me a photo of the night skyline. Of course, I could no longer reply. Josh truly hadn't told his father about my passing, and even blocked Lance from seeing the obituary posted on my WhatsApp. This was for the best. In life, I had clung to him for too long. I feared that in death, I would still trouble him, forcing him to change his flight tickets. Besides, I didn't think he wanted to see me one last time anyway. The skyline was beautiful, but for some reason, that night, he stared at his phone for a long while on the windswept balcony. I peered over to look, and suddenly understood. In the past, whenever he sent me a message, I would always reply instantly. During his previous overseas business trips, he would casually snap a few photos to send me, and I would respond with saved emojis from Josh. A thumbs up, or 2 thumbs up, with brilliant written on them. This time, he waited for a long while, but I didn't reply. Professor Shaw, it's starting to rain again. Come back inside, you'll catch a chill. A young woman's voice sounded behind him. It was his student. In academic circles, some things were tacitly understood. The girl affectionately moved to drape a coat over his shoulders, but he pushed her away. Fish and chips. Awful. Lance sent me a picture of the restaurant. My body was pushed into the crematorium. It's raining again. Lance Shaw sent me a view from his hotel window. Friends and family attended my burial ceremony. Presentation tonight. Flying back tomorrow. Lance stood at the podium, cameras flashing at him. I could barely understand with my broken French. His achievement seemed to have made a significant contribution to human development. There he was, under the spotlight, shining brilliantly in his field of expertise, never failing to meet expectations. I suppose that's why I loved him for so many years. But that was my love for him, not his for me. As the April drizzle fell and my ashes were laid to rest beside a square headstone, I finally understood this truth. That night, after the meeting ended, when Lance's third call went unanswered, he changed his flight to the early hours of the morning. On the plane, he frowned constantly, his face even colder than usual. It made sense, though. For so many years, I had always been at his beck and call. He wasn't used to suddenly being unable to reach me. Usually, whenever he returned to the country, I would go to the airport to pick him up. I'd always arrive an hour or two early, just waiting for him at the airport. It was a habit. One can't let their loved one suffer any inconvenience. I always did my best to make his life comfortable. But this time, he had to walk through the nearly empty arrival hall alone, then hail an overpriced taxi at 4 in the morning. When he arrived home at 6 in the morning, he first knocked on the door. When there was no answer, he used his fingerprint to unlock the door and pushed it open. The house was empty. Everything was as he had left it, the sink spotlessly clean, the dining table bare. Only my frequently worn slippers were still placed by the entrance. He unbuttoned his coat, which he had left fastened in his rush to leave, and walked around the unlit house, circling again and again. Bedroom, balcony, bathroom. Finally, he pulled open the washing machine door. Finding nothing, he paused, took out his phone, and called me. After a long wait, just a busy tone. He took a deep breath, his thumb sliding to another number on the list. Josh's. The relationship between father and son had been tense even before Josh came of age. In recent years, Josh only came home to see me, never intending to acknowledge his father. Lance was the same, immersed in his academic pursuits, implying he shouldn't be bothered with childcare. He had been absent during the most crucial stages of his son's growth, so his son never had a kind word for him. "What do you want?" Josh answered gruffly. "Where's your mother?" Lance's tone was equally harsh. Josh paused for a moment. Then came an odd laugh, indescribable, as he mumbled the question back. "Where's my mum?" "My mum's gone." "Gone where?" Lance's frown deepened, the first light of dawn falling on his furrowed brow. I heard our son's voice turn hollow on the other end of the line. "Not gone somewhere. Mum's passed away, Dad." A long silence stretched across both ends of the phone line. From where I stood, I could see Lance's knuckles turning white as he gripped the phone. "Are you still playing such childish pranks at your age?" he said in a lecturing tone. He didn't believe it. It seemed that the idea of me dying without him being notified of the funeral was not something that could exist in Lance's reality. Josh was silent on the other end for a moment, then let out a bitter laugh, as if resigned. "Dad," he said, "I haven't joked with you since I was in year 6. Josh hung up. The phone beeped as the call ended. I found it strange that Lance seemed frozen in place, still holding the phone in the same position. Slowly, he sat down on the sofa in the living room. Lance was meticulous and serious in his academic work, but quite the opposite in his personal life. He was extremely casual to the point of carelessness. That's why I was always the one tidying up the house. His study was often piled high with papers, and he wouldn't let me touch anything. He had scolded me more than once for this. Looking back now, I suppose I was never really the right type of person for him. He probably needed a female scientist who could engage with him in endless discussions about the vast academic universe, not a third-rate magazine editor who only knew how to wash sofa covers until they faded, and had no idea what a polar air mass was. A sliver of light crept into the room. I watched as he ran his fingers along the lace trim of the sofa cover. He rubbed the slightly dusty lace over and over again. The front door opened. Lance whipped his head around so quickly I feared he might strain his neck. It was Josh, swinging his keys as he entered. "Dad, good you're here," he said. "Where did Mom keep her household registration book and birth certificate?" "Need to go to the court." Lance's fingers, which had been fidgeting with the lace trim of the cushion, suddenly froze. "To cancel her records." In the cabinet beneath the TV, we kept some of our personal documents. Lance tended to misplace such things, including his award medals, so I always carefully stored them away for him. He never cared much about those things, but I would always proudly run my fingers over them. "What's the point?" he'd ask, not understanding why I was so pleased about his awards. I'd just smile and link my arm through his. "Because you're my husband, darling. Of course I'm happy when you win awards. When we were younger, I used to be more playful and affectionate. But over the years, I've become more reserved." Lance was now holding our marriage certificate, reluctant to let it go. The photo on it wasn't particularly good. He hadn't even cracked a smile, while I was beaming as if it were my own private fairy tale wedding. Josh found my identity card and turned to see his father staring at our marriage certificate. "Dad, don't worry," he said. "Now that Mom's gone, your marriage is automatically dissolved. You're not her husband anymore. Never will be again. Aren't you happy? Now you can freely date all those young female students you bring around." The biting sarcasm in his tone was obvious. Normally, Lance would have lost his temper hearing his son speak like that. But this time, he remained silent for a long while. He seemed lost in thought. Finally, he slowly stood up and grabbed his trench coat from the sofa. "I'll go with you," he said quietly. The journey was silent, neither of them uttering a word. To be honest, I had often wondered what expression Lance would wear after my death. Probably just an O or I see. Before he immersed himself back into his grand research for the betterment of humanity. He didn't love me, this was a fact I knew all too well. So my departure would likely be nothing more than a minor interlude to him. Neither big nor small, like a pebble dropped into a lake. I was surprised he personally came to cancel my registration. I wasn't sure whether to thank him for this gesture of old time's sake. Observing one's own registration being cancelled was quite a unique experience. Josh handed over some documents, while Lance sat on a chair in the waiting area not far away. Even so, he was still eye-catching. His forest green coat made him look like a solitary pine standing tall in the world. I could always spot him instantly in a crowd. I didn't know what he was thinking. Those black eyes of his quietly reflected the hurrying crowd. And so, Josh filled out my cancellation form, and the staff on the other side of the window confirmed it. When it was passed back, there was an additional stamp on the registration book. Cancelled. Lance stared at those 2 words for a long time. So long that Josh snatched it back from his father's hands. "I'll come to collect Mom's belongings in a few days." "Who said you could take them?" Lance's voice had grown hoarse from lack of use. "I'm her son. Why can't I? I'm still her husband." You're nothing of the sort." After Josh spat out these words, both of them fell silent. Lance was still standing there, but I felt as if all strength had been drained from him in an instant. He closed his eyes briefly and said slowly, "Your mother never told me she was ill." "Yeah," Josh nodded. "What good would it have done to tell you?" Josh yanked away the registration book stamped with "cancelled," leaving Lance standing alone at the entrance of the register office. I knew it all along. Lance had always been a passerby. It was impossible to warm up someone like him. He was always rational, always aloof. Under the scorching sun, he turned and walked down the street filled with the chirping of cicadas. I thought Lance would return to his unfinished projects after going home. Instead, he started daydreaming from the moment he entered the hallway. Just pure daydreaming. For instance, he stood in front of the handmade model I had placed in the entryway for over 30 minutes. This model was something I had brought back from Melbourne, and I could never get the last piece to fit properly. He had hugged it, called me silly, and then put it together in no time. Or he'd sit on the sofa, staring at the aloe vera plant we were growing together, until the sun had set. I had gotten the aloe vera from a herbal remedy shop nearby. When my skin was constantly acting up, I would often stare at him enviously, poking him and asking why his skin was so perfect. Most of the time, he'd dodge away in mock disgust. Sometimes, he'd take my hand and gently bite my finger. As night fell, he didn't turn on the lights, just sat alone in the dim living room. I thought, perhaps he still wasn't used to my absence. After all, I had taken care of him for so many years. After all, Annie Brown would always leave a light on for Lance Shaw to come home to. At 1 in the morning, he finally stirred. He took a cold shower, wrapped himself in the duvet, with the night sky high above. Lance usually had an extremely regular schedule. Sleeping after midnight was rare for him, but he seemed unable to fall asleep. He suddenly sat up. The moon hung high. He got out of bed and walked to the balcony. The cucumber and chili plants I had haggled for with the market vendor hadn't been watered for days and were wilting. He crouched down and gave them a little water from the nearby watering can. As he was watering, his hand trembled slightly. In the night, few lights remained on in the neighborhood. Suddenly, a dog barked, breaking the desolate silence. I couldn't go anywhere. These days, I could only float around Lance. Lance, who hadn't slept all night, surprisingly tidied up the house the next day, which was completely out of character for him. The school, company, and students all called him, but he had no reaction. Each time, he just said flatly, "I've just been widowed." After being with Lance for over 20 years, I couldn't understand his behavior after my death. I knew he wouldn't shed even a single tear after I died. This was something I had long understood. He said he wouldn't invest emotions in anything outside of scientific research. That's just how he was. To be honest, I thought he would be the first person around me to move on from the grief of my passing. He might not even be sad that I'm gone. His coldness ran deep to his marrow, bordering on a cruel divinity. But now his reaction didn't seem normal. Like staring at the gift I brought him back from my Morocco trip for an entire afternoon. The doorbell rang, and he slowly shuffled over to open it. Gary Martin stood outside, our good friend who lived in the same neighborhood and Lance's closest companion. "Lance, old chap, just out for a stroll," Gary said. "Here, got you this scone from that bakery at the entrance of the estate." Lance's gaze moved woodenly to the scone. I had to admit, Gary truly understood his friend. Lance hadn't eaten for 2 days and a night. And Gary knew that without me, Lance wouldn't even know how to cook for himself. The sunset flowed like blood in the doorway as Lance stepped aside slightly to let him in. After a while, he said softly, "You were even invited to her funeral." With just one sentence, the person beside him fell silent. "Oh, Lance," Gary sighed. "It's all in the past now. Let the dead rest in peace." Gary stayed with Lance for a while. Lance was never talkative, and now he was even more silent. Gary glanced at his watch, and before he could say anything, Lance had already said, "You should go now." His personality really was something, not leaving any face for others. Fortunately, Gary wasn't one to take offense. As he said goodbye at the door, Just as he was about to leave, Gary suddenly leaned in. It seemed as if he had been hesitating for a long time before finally deciding to speak. The sunset echoed quietly behind him, his gaze seemingly surging with sorrow. Annie often told me she envied me when she was alive. What did she envy about me? She envied that I could do scientific research. That I could understand those complex theories. She said if only she were a bit quicker on the uptake. Maybe Lance would talk to her a bit more. The remnants of the sunset reflected in the eyes of the man before him. And Lance stood there motionless. Lance. When you give your whole heart to someone, it's not for them to trample it to pieces, is it? I leaned against the doorframe, watching Lance as he continued to sort through our belongings. He had been at it all night, seemingly tireless. He came across a photo album and opened it. Inside were the photos I had collected of the two of us. There weren't many. Lance, with that face that had been attracting attention since childhood, didn't like having his picture taken. Most of the time, I had to force him to pose. Then there were the times when he had no choice. Like the one his fingertips were now caressing a photo of us on the cable car at Richmond Hill. Back then, there wasn't much in the way of safety measures. After he finished explaining the mechanics of the cable car to me, I was terrified and clung tightly to his arm. He just looked at me with those cold eyes that seemed to say, I regret explaining this now. I remembered there was a story behind this photo. It was probably the only time I had a big row with him, threatening divorce. Lance was always busy, especially when he was younger. He rarely had any free time. And it took a lot of pestering and convincing on my part to get him to agree to take 3 or 4 days off for a trip together. We had set the date and bought the tickets. I had been looking forward to it for days, my excitement building. But just a day before we were due to leave, he suddenly had a group meeting he couldn't miss. I was already quite angry, but I hadn't lost it completely. What really pushed me over the edge was that he was going out of town for this meeting. Alone with a female student. This student came from an influential family. And whenever I went to see Lance, she would always be there. Dressed to the nines, hovering around him. When I arrived, she would corner Lance with professional questions. And half an hour would pass in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, I would be left waiting, the takeaway I had brought growing cold. I asked Lance if he could reschedule the meeting. He said he couldn't. You should go by yourself, he said coldly, still sorting through his papers. He said that in the morning. By evening, I had placed divorce papers on his desk. He finally looked up from his pile of newspapers and data to look at me. Back then, divorce was rare. But at that moment, I really wanted to leave. I was incredibly upset, my emotions all over the place. It's possible I was already pregnant with Josh. And my hormones were playing havoc with my feelings. It was the kind of impulsive act that only my younger self could have done. But now, I find myself wishing we had actually gone through with it. That night, Lance packed his bags and stood outside my room. He was never one for many words, so even now, I don't know how he managed to postpone that unavoidable group meeting. Anyway, the next day we set off on our trip, and that's when we took that photo. I'm clinging to his arm, pressed close against him, while he maintains his usual expressionless face, handsome but cold. After we returned, his career took a bit of a downturn. I suppose I might have had a small part to play in that. It seems like we never really had many happy memories together. It's a wonder we managed to get married and have a child at all. He flipped over the photo, revealing a message I had written on the back. I'm sorry, Lance. I never seemed to know how to make you happy. Suddenly, he gripped the photo tightly. The edge of the paper dug into his flesh until it drew blood. Lance found the wine we made together last year in the storage room. The seal on the lid had my handwriting. Lance, open in July, 3 years from now. I wrote that line knowing I had cancer. Understanding he wouldn't remember these things. While tidying his study, he uncovered a note pressed under the glass desktop. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. I had written it for him when one of his projects ran into trouble and his team was in a frenzy. The only support I could offer was 3 meals a day, perfectly tempered water at dawn, and words of encouragement secretly tucked under his books. The lotus seed and red bean soup I made still lay quietly in the fridge. He didn't like bitter things, insisting he wouldn't eat it unless the lotus cores were removed. I smiled and coaxed him. All right. I'll remove the lotus cores for the next batch, okay? In truth, I already knew there wouldn't be a next batch for me to make. Now he sat at the dining table, gently pulling off the seal I had placed, and ate that box of lotus seed and red bean soup, sip by sip, with the wine that hadn't yet reached its time. Then, 15 minutes later, he went to the toilet and was violently sick. Well, that stuff had been in the fridge for over 2 weeks. Lance rarely drank, saying alcohol only clouded his thinking. But he finished that bottle anyway. His tolerance must be low. He clung to the bottle so tightly that, for a moment, I wondered if I had gotten the date wrong and the wine had fully fermented. He ran to the toilet to be sick again. There was a huge crash from the bathroom. He had fallen headfirst into the sink. Water gushed, pouring over his flushed ear tips. He slowly raised his head, staring at the figure in the mirror. Then suddenly, without warning, he lashed out, smashing his fist into the mirror. The great scientist Lance had quite a strong hand. The mirror cracked, blood flowing along the fissure. He stared at the distorted figure within, utterly dejected. I rarely had the chance to see him like this, so emotionally volatile. In the past, no matter how I provoked him, he showed little reaction, whether in anger or in expressing love. Ironically, after decades of marriage, it turns out he had never properly expressed his love for me. The blood on his hands stopped flowing, and he walked out of the bathroom. He woodenly dragged a chair to the bedroom wardrobe. Swaying, he climbed onto the chair. The top shelf of the wardrobe held our seasonal quilts. I was sensitive to cold, even a slight chill was unbearable for me. When we were young, I would whine to him, opening my arms when I came in from the cold outside. I'm cold, hug me. He refused bluntly. Buy a blanket. Later, I bought a fleece blanket and never needed his hugs again. Yes, when did I stop being so passionate? I can't remember. That fleece blanket was still hidden inside the wardrobe. The one I used to wrap myself in every winter. This was what he was looking for. He caught hold of a corner. Then he lost his balance. He fell, clutching tightly to the blanket. There was a loud thud, but he seemed unresponsive. After a while, he just gripped my blanket tightly, as if it was the only thing he had left. He seemed unable to stand up. So he slowly dragged himself with the blanket to a corner of the sofa. He wrapped himself in the blanket. Perhaps his drunken fit had run its course. He hadn't slept for 3 days, and everything he'd eaten had been vomited up. He closed his eyes briefly. The man who shouldn't feel cold was now wrapping the blanket so tightly around himself. There was even a hint of longing for my things. Could he be longing for them? I had never thought this possible. He struggled several times to reach for his phone and dialed a number. It was Gary. Gary, let me tell you, he began. On the other end of the phone, Gary seemed to have anticipated this. Annie's gone, Lance. She's gone. The dead can't come back to life. Don't do anything rash. Gary, Lance interrupted. In the static-filled night, he tilted his head back, staring at the ceiling that would never light up again. He asked the person on the other end of the phone. Gary, did she hate me? After I died, he didn't shed a single tear. So why now? Holding my belongings. Why is he crying like this? Josh and Lance got into a fight over the issue of my belongings, ending up in the hospital. Several friends and family members had arrived. Josh was being held back as he shouted at Lance. What right do you have to keep my mom's things? Have you ever cared for me since I was little? Have you ever fulfilled your responsibilities as a father? Just because you didn't want to be bothered. Just because you're a great scientist. Yes, you contribute to humanity. How idealistic you are, how great you are. So what? I wasn't important, Mom wasn't important. Now Mom's gone. What right do you have to take Mom's things away from me? Lance was held back by Gary, unable to utter a word. He wiped the blood from his lips. In just a few days, he looked like a different person, having lost weight so quickly. The summer breeze swirled through the hospital's long corridors. His son's angry curses echoed behind him as Gary patted his shoulder. "That's enough, that's enough." At this point, Lance, who can you blame? A rather neutral statement. Lance coughed twice. "I never thought." It was so faint, extinguished in the gentle summer breeze. The summer hospital corridor seemed to stretch endlessly. He surely didn't know that I was floating right in front of him. He clutched at his chest, as if not understanding why it hurt so much. "I never thought I'd lose her." The tormented soul became Lance. And I became the one seeking release. I don't know what people turn into after death, nor do I know how long I'll drift. I can't do anything, only watch Lance day after day. This man, who held such little importance in my decades of life, is now someone I never want to see again in death. Lance tidied up the house and himself. He shaved off the stubble of several days and restyled his hair. Time has always favored him. The light filtering into the bathroom illuminated his profile, making even his dejection appear as another layer of charm. He bought a plane ticket and flew alone to Italy to secretly view Josh's exhibition. It must be the first time he's seen Josh's paintings in all these years. When Josh was very young, he would cry at everything. Lance, busy with his research, found it bothersome and left Josh with me and his grandmother. When Josh started school, Lance was disappointed that his son hadn't inherited any of his mathematical talent. He completely withdrew from Josh, despite being a professor himself, refusing to help Josh with even a single problem. So now, standing before an enormous floor-to-ceiling painting, what thoughts were running through his mind as he gazed up at it? He stayed in the exhibition hall until sunset, then left as quietly as he had come. He also visited my grave. He'd always been a man of few words when it came to me. So he stood there, staring at my photograph on the headstone from daylight to dusk. As he was leaving, he reached out to touch my picture but pulled back at the last moment. Josh had chosen the photo. In it, I'm smiling gently for eternity. Back home. He took a shower and changed into the clothes I had insisted on buying him for Christmas. He slowly took out the sleeping pills from the bedside drawer. He hadn't been able to sleep without them these past few days. So he'd asked the doctor to prescribe some. He stared at the pill bottle in his hand for a long time. In the empty and silent room, as if he could no longer find any trace of the person from days past, he tossed the sleeping pills into his backpack. Before closing the front door, suddenly, without warning, he looked deeply in my direction. Then he walked away without looking back. Lance knew of my existence. 3 days later, I suddenly realized this fact. Because from 3 days ago, Lance began writing some words in his notebook. "Annie, I don't know if you're by my side or not. You might be, or you might not be. But what I can be sure of is, if that experimental direction wasn't wrong, you must be able to see these words." What did he mean? I blinked my eyes. At this moment, Lance boarded the green-painted train, this rumbling machine heading non-stop towards the snowy country. The destination on the ticket was Russia. Green shadows flashed past the window like rippling wind. As he wrote, I gradually discovered something chilling. If it's true that souls exist after death, which is my current state, then logically, everyone should become a soul after they die. But why could I only see myself? Why did I exist? Why was I the only one existing? What exactly was I? If I had become a ghost, why couldn't I see other ghosts? Could it be that I was the only ghost in this world? Once this question arose, I realized I had taken everything for granted before. The fact that I still had consciousness after death was extremely strange in itself. I suddenly raised my head, looking at the man writing in his notebook stroke by stroke. It wasn't a coincidence. None of it was a coincidence. The reason I still had consciousness after death was definitely not some supernatural occurrence. It was because of Lance. This man, who was in touch with the world's most cutting-edge technology. Standing at the academic pinnacle. He had done something to my body without my knowledge. The universe follows the law of causality. The law of entropy tells us that the universe moves from order to disorder. Time only flows forward. Flowers bloom and then wither, the dead cannot be brought back to life. The train rumbled on, Lance Shaw leaning against the carriage wall. His hand never stopped writing in the notebook. How ridiculous, Annie. I once dismissed the theory of universal regression as nonsense. I thought it was a delusion of those neurotic patients who wanted to return to the past. Now, however, I desperately hope for the feasibility of that once hypothetical theory. The theory of universal information conservation. A fringe theory that no information in the universe truly disappears. If each moment of consciousness is an information fragment, then your existence may be recorded in some cosmic structure. Even though I didn't believe in the theory of universal regression, I still implanted what we call a consciousness anchor, a new concept device, in you during your coma due to acute appendicitis 20 years ago. In 2002, this technology was not mature and there was only one chance. After that, it was shelved due to enormous costs and inability to verify. It was just a newly built theoretical model. I only made sure it wouldn't cause any side effects to the subject. I didn't even know if it would succeed, after all. We don't know what the world of the dead is like, we can't observe or perceive it. Perhaps everything about you has already dissipated with the decay of your body. Or perhaps you're watching me write these words right now. In any case, I now understand that back then, I had already, out of selfishness, not wanting you to leave me, made you the carrier of the consciousness anchor. I stood there stunned, feeling a chill down my spine. So that's why I still had consciousness after death. Why I've been bound to his side all this time. Annie, tell me. The white snow-covered plain stretched beyond the window. His pen stopped on the last page. Can people really go back to the past? The researchers at the Russian laboratory seemed to welcome Lance's arrival. Or rather, almost every laboratory in the world welcomed Lance. The building, hidden in a snow-covered plain, was said to house the most cutting-edge scientific power in the world today. They were doing their utmost to tackle that proposition. A problem that humans have been trying to solve for hundreds or thousands of years. Whether it's traveling to the future or returning to the past. I watched as Lance put down his luggage and threw himself into the research without pause. I saw the papers in front of Lance gradually pile up into a thick stack. I saw him often forget to eat, and the time he slept each day was always pitiful. He seemed to have gone mad. Or rather, just to verify the answer to that question. In his spare time each day, he would take that notebook and write some words for me. I don't understand either space-time transfer or quantum entanglement. But if I exist here, it means that their experiment might have some probability of success. And during this time, watching Lance become like this. As time wheels round like sand, swift as a white colt glimpsed through a crack. I find I don't get tired or bored. A consciousness entity no longer has these emotions. I sit on the bookshelf nearby, staring at him as he thinks. All along, do I hate him? Actually, not anymore. When feelings were down to nothing in the end, honestly. Lance isn't good or bad, in the end we were just a very ordinary married couple. Perhaps not loving each other so sweetly. That's all. I gave him my heart and soul, my everything. But by the time he turned back, I was already gone. And when I learned that he would have such a big emotional reaction because of my departure, I actually felt nothing at all. Lance is really amazing, he can wear down a person's passionate heart to nothing. He thought he wouldn't care at all. But in the end he miscalculated. He miscalculated, but I didn't care anymore. I sat there, watching it like a series of plays, the ending didn't matter to me. Lance no longer mattered to me either. For those years wasted on Lance, I don't regret it. Human choices are not meant to be regretted. I wish Lance could understand this truth, and then let me go. Instead of continuing a crazy experiment like now. His theory was to separate people into very small pieces. Quite abstruse and difficult to understand. I could only try my best to comprehend. Those very small pieces could no longer be called individuals. They were atoms, 10 to the power of 28 protons, and amazingly, each proton in the quantum state could accurately mark its structure and function. That formed a proton stream, which is my current form of consciousness. Only this kind of proton stream has the conditions to advance in a spiral of light in a wormhole. This experiment succeeded in Lance's third year in Russia. He put his thumb into the machine operated. A smooth cross-section was produced. But no extra blood, bone, or nerves were generated. He successfully became matter that could not be observed by humans, just like me. The nerves belonging to Lance when his finger was cut must have stimulated him. He knelt on the ground clutching his finger in pain. But he laughed. Over the years he had become increasingly neurotic. Gary came to see him, bringing scones from the shop downstairs in the snow-covered estate. Looking at the man in front of him whose hair had grown long enough to tie back, Gary just let out a sigh. Lance. Without Annie, there's less and less anyone who can control you. I don't think my existence would bring anything to Lance. All I could do was hand him a cup of hot tea when he was tired. Is this cup of hot tea important? If Gary could answer my question, he would definitely grab my shoulders, nod, and say it's important. The experiment came to the second stage. It was spring in Moscow. After having the conditions to artificially create proton streams, all that was left was to create a wormhole that could traverse space and time. I don't understand physics, but wormholes are definitely the most frequently appearing term in the science fiction stories in my magazine. Its difficulty and absurdity can be seen from this. He wanted to artificially create wormholes. Lance's experiments were going even less smoothly than before. Fewer and fewer people supported him, because he was no longer active in the field of practical physics in recent years. He even attracted criticism, saying he had begun to indulge in quack research, delusionally attempting the impossible reversal of time. They said he had become a madman, experimenting on himself, and would one day die on that terrible machine. In fact, the precondition for time travel in his theory was death. After all, being broken down into protons, a person would be reduced to less than ashes. Because of this, no one was willing to be his test subject. He would become the first test subject of the behemoth he created. Perhaps also the last. On a sunny morning in Moscow, he welcomed the final hurdle of the experiment. The few remaining followers would be responsible for observing the entire experiment from outside a glass room. He lay down in that somewhat bizarrely shaped box made of silver vortex titanium. The machine started up. No one knew if this thing was cutting him into countless tiny invisible pieces, or if it could really take him through time. Perhaps both. The humming of the operation reverberated. Regardless of his condition, I soon had a reaction. I felt something pulling at me. It was a kind of sensing, it was a vortex. I rotated with its movement, but never felt dizzy. I couldn't perceive, but I knew that self was a fluid. Countless things exploded, shuttled, and filled around me. I was being led, yet it was like rushing forward. I couldn't feel the flow of time. It was as if billions of years whistled past my ears. Yet it was also like an instant. I fell into an abyss, falling endlessly. Did Lance's experiments succeed? Perhaps. But I had no time to care about people's cheers. No time to care about how great he was, or what kind of changes the future would bring. I saw vortices I couldn't see. I heard whispers I couldn't hear, until a bright light appeared before my eyes. I opened my eyes. The spring breeze blew. Light fell through the library window, and the poetry review in my hand had just turned to the next page. Someone was beside me, tugging at my sleeve. Annie, Lance is the teaching assistant today. If we're late, we might not get seats. The crowd surged around us, a constant flow of hurried movement. In the library, where resources were still incomplete and infrastructure slightly worn, young people often gathered, diligently striving for new ideals. The chiming of the clock tower pulled me from my thoughts, accompanied by a voice. Annie, what's wrong? You've been going on about Lance for ages. Come on, let's go, or we'll miss out on seats. Lance. Lance Shaw. Hearing that name, I suddenly snapped back to reality. It was like white noise, soft yet impossible to ignore. But this time, I realized something. Quite plainly, upon hearing his name, my first instinct was to avoid it. I didn't love Lance anymore. For how many years had I thought of him, stayed by his side for so long? Long enough to build a family. To become someone who shared his days and nights, even becoming family. In every moment when he stirred my heart, day and night, I would lose focus. I suddenly realized that one day, I felt nothing for him anymore. It seemed that such a day had truly come for me regarding him. I gently pushed away the girl's hand pulling at me. I smiled at her. You go ahead. I want to study a bit more. At least give me one more chance to start over. I don't want Lance Shaw. There was a commotion at the entrance. Not too big, not too small, but just enough to make me lift my head from the vintage magazine I was reading. Someone was in a hurry. Normally, when people are rushing to find someone, they're usually glanced at and then ignored by others. But this was Lance. 20-year-old Lance, his white shirt perfectly accentuating his waist. Black hair tousled by the wind as he walked. His features were striking, and compared to his adult self, he still hadn't shed the raw edge of youth. Lips pressed together, he had that unapproachable look. In that simple era, he walked like a model straight out of a fashion magazine, drawing everyone's eyes to him. I hid my face behind my book, hoping not to be noticed. But he walked straight towards me. He grabbed my wrist, trying to kiss me. I raised my hand and slapped him. These two things happened within about 2 seconds, causing a small ripple of gasps from the onlookers. His face was turned to the side from my slap. His fringe covered his dark eyes. I couldn't see his expression. I only knew that his hand gripping my wrist still hadn't let go. Annie, he called me. I looked at him. Let go, please. Cold, firm tone. I never thought I'd use it with Lance. We were definitely the center of attention now. I didn't mind laying it all out. Lance, if you keep pulling me like this, the whole school will hear about you harassing a female classmate. He let go of my hand. Sorry. Actually, if you really think about it, since my death, it had been a long, long time since I'd spoken to him. He unconsciously pressed his index finger and thumb together, lightly pinching. Annie, we've gone back to the past. Can we start over? I looked at him very, very deeply. Many things can't be helped. You don't know you've fallen in love when you do. And when you want to turn back, you find you can't. People call it regret. Lance was too proud. In relationships, it usually starts beautiful, then friction leads to hatred. Lance was the opposite. He didn't care about me at first. But in the end, he cared about me immensely. But I don't like you anymore, Lance. The setting sun gently rippled. I walked past him, enunciating each word. I never imagined there would come a day when Lance and I would switch roles. But that's exactly what happened. I used to work hard on new recipes just so he would eat a little more. Now he's doing the same for me. I suddenly stopped in my tracks, and the man following me stopped as well. I watched as he pulled out a bunch of luscious roses from behind his back. He was too eye-catching, even more so than the roses. A porcelain-skinned man with downcast eyes and vibrant roses. It was indeed a pleasing sight. But looking at it, I felt absolutely nothing. If anything, I felt a bit annoyed. Lance, look at yourself, I said, standing on the stairs, looking down at him. Don't you think this isn't like you at all? Haven't you grown tired of being rejected so many times? Why do you insist on clinging to me? You've got a second chance at life. Surely there are many other things you could be doing. Why bother? I don't care, he interrupted. I can't do it. I can give up everything. But a life without you, he suddenly stopped speaking. His dark eyes gazed deeply into mine. I don't want to live a single second of it. Annie. Without you, I'll die. His eyes were truly beautiful. Like black opals, deep and captivating. I suddenly remembered how I used to long for his clear gaze to fall upon me. How I yearned to hear him speak words of love. But why now, when he finally does, do I not want to see or hear any of it? The wind howled, scattering flower petals in the air. But I don't love you anymore. That was the reason. The reason his eyes suddenly reddened for a moment after I told him. These days, as soon as I return to the dorm, I become the center of attention. I hold my book, letting my roommates chatter around me. Annie, you've become a celebrity. Come on, tell us what's really going on between you and Lance. How did you even get involved with him? Turning down Lance Shaw. My roommate bumps my shoulder. That's so cool. Perhaps in everyone's mind at that time, the probability of Lance actively pursuing someone was lower than proving the Riemann hypothesis. But more than that, I've gone back to the past. Lance doesn't matter anymore. I close my book and hop off the bed. Waving to them, I say, let's not talk about that now. Are you interested in starting a business? A business? I nod, opening the magazine in my hand to show them. The books we're reading now are all in print, right? Whether it's serialized novels or submissions. But what if I told you that in the near future, novels based on websites will rapidly rise in popularity? Would you believe me? I want to create a website for serializing novels. Words like website and online novels are rarely mentioned in this era. Youthful visions of the future are always full of wild ideas. And the unknown has its own unique, enticing allure. Moreover, I now hold the key. I can be certain that in this life, everything can start anew for me. So compared to the entanglements of love, undoubtedly, walking a path never taken before is far more appealing. The starlight shines brightly in my eyes. That night, the lights in the girls' dorm stayed on until dawn. Everything is starting anew for me. In this life, there will be no Lance. Extra chapter. The early days of summer had brought continuous heavy rain. Lance stood across from the school building. From his vantage point, he could see a faint light still glowing from one of the windows. There was likely a celebration taking place inside. The carefully wrapped gift in his hands had been held for so long. Yet he no longer had a reason to give it. He knew that even if he did, it would end up in the rubbish bin beside him. Today was Annie's birthday. He had disrupted the timeline, bringing her back to their first birthday together in the past. It had been 108 days since Annie rejected him. To be honest, did he know he would end up like this? He did. If he had just thought about it, he would have realized how wrong his actions were. But why could some feelings be hidden so deeply? Why could some people go so far without looking back? He had returned to the past, but the past had given him the cruelest punishment. In fact, many times, if he had just taken one step forward, it wouldn't have ended like this. He should have simply spent time with her on her birthdays in the past. He should have smiled back when she looked up at him excitedly and spoke. He should have hugged her when she was cold in winter. If he had done these things, perhaps she wouldn't have hated him so much. Perhaps she wouldn't have refused to tell him even in her final moments. It was that simple. He could have had her. How arrogant he had been. He had so many chances to set things right. Why had he thrown them away? Why had he ignored them? His heart began to ache again. He raised his hand to press against it. Such regret. That unending feeling stimulated his heart. A feeling of wanting to escape time enveloped him. I was truly wrong. Can you come back, please? But in that downpour, he was like a wandering spirit. He could only look up at the window with its faint warm light. Just like before. Every birthday, every anniversary they had shared. He had coldly passed them by. Priding himself on being clear-headed, thinking it was all formality. Formality. Now, if he could spend even one more second with her, he would endure any formality. The evening breeze, laden with rain, squeezed into his collar. He looked up longingly at the window that would never again light up for him. But at least it was something. He had returned to the past. At least he could see her, rather than just a photograph. Some memories. A series of cold nightmares. The second hand swept past the markings. 3, 2. He silently mouthed the birthday wishes he had never spoken aloud. Darkness fell. After the light went out, she disappeared too. He was awakened by a loud noise. It took him a while to realize that the noise was the sound of him falling onto the floor. His bones ached. He couldn't muster any strength. He couldn't stand up. This is what happens when you get old. All sorts of ailments start to appear. Another dream. He told himself. Could the dream have lasted a bit longer? He asked himself again. He simply lay on the floor, wanting to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. He stared at the ceiling, watching the evening sun gradually move across the mottled surface. Until someone knocked on the door. He couldn't get up, but he knew the person knocking had a key. After a few minutes, the door was opened. Gary walked in, tapping his cane, searching for him in the room. Finally, he found him lying on the floor. Lance? Lance! Are you dead? Gary threw his cane aside to check on him. But Lance opened his eyes. Why are you lying here? Gary, himself quite elderly, still tried to help him up. Lance heard his own hoarse voice emerge from his throat. I need to find Annie. She went out to buy groceries today. It's raining. I need to pick her up and bring her home. Annie's gone, Lance. Gary knew this was happening again and reminded him, unsurprised. Have you stopped taking the medication the doctor prescribed? She's not gone. But Lance couldn't hear Gary speaking anymore. He continued muttering to himself. I found a way to travel back in time. I found her. She just became a consciousness following me, and then I took her back to the past. We can start over. She's not dead. I found her. I found her. He became increasingly agitated as he spoke, gesticulating wildly. Gary held him down. Lance. Let me tell you, it's 2049 now. Annie passed away over 20 years ago. You haven't traveled back in time. What are you thinking? Modern physics generally considers time to be just information. The past doesn't exist. We can never travel through time and space. You can never go back to the past. He gripped the shoulders of the old man opposite him. How can you not understand? Lance suddenly lost all strength. He looked at Gary with cloudy eyes. Lance shook his head, saying no, I really have found a way to go back to the past. Yes, dreaming is your way of traveling back in time. Lance, you're truly pitiful. It's been over 30 years, and you still can't move on. If that's the case, why didn't you spend those previous 20-some years accompanying her properly? I regret it. Lance just kept repeating this phrase. Yes, but you can't go back to the past, no matter how renowned a scientist you are. Gary placed the scones he had brought on the table. I was out for a walk and thought I'd check on you. Honestly, don't you think it's time you hired a caregiver to look after you? You're getting on in years too, Lance. The door closed, and Lance sat in the rocking chair, staring at the plate of scones. He increasingly preferred long silences. But his thoughts rotated with the summer light. He seemed to be able to see again. See the summer from over a decade ago, woven with cicada songs. Annie excitedly running through the front door, waving a bag in her hand. Lance, there's a new bakery that just opened near our neighborhood. Try these. Are they good? He looked at her and cried hysterically. The blanket she once wore was so worn out, threads poking out everywhere. But he couldn't bear to throw it away. Now even his crying sounded awful. Why cry? He just thought. Many years ago, at that blind date. He could have refused. But it was because he saw her. Just because it was her. Just because in the vast sea of people, only she made him look up.